April 3rd, 2019. A bruised and battered teenage boy is seen sprinting across the Ohio River Bridge, clearly distraught and looking for help. He desperately runs into the roads and up to cars, asking people to roll their windows down and directly putting himself in danger. Local residents approach him, unwilling to fully engage with the boy, as they feel as if he could be on drugs or pose a threat to them. He is manic and appears in distress. When they do talk to the boy, he tells them that he is Timmothy Pitzen, the boy who was kidnapped over 7 years ago, and he just escaped his kidnappers. The police quickly respond to the call and arrive to find that the boy is still wandering the streets. He repeated that his name is Timmothy Pitzen. He was kidnapped about 8 years ago, and that he is 14 years old. To them, he appeared to be much older and doesn't match the photo of the child that they pull up. The boy claims he escaped from 2 kidnappers in the Cincinnati area and then fled across a bridge into Kentucky. According to the official police report, he told police he fled from a Red Roof Inn just across the bridge and that his captors have held him for the past 7 years. According to the police report, Timothy described the 2 kidnappers as 2 male whites, bodybuilder type build. One had black curly hair, a Mountain Dew shirt and jeans, and has a spiderweb tattoo on his neck. The other was short in stature and had a snake tattoo on his arm. The kidnapper's vehicle, according to the report, was described by Timothy to officers as a newer model Ford SUV with unknown Wisconsin plates in a second row. The Ford is white with yellow transfer paint and a dent on the left back bumper, the report states. Immediately, the police investigated these claims and put a bolo out for the vehicle, but nothing was found. They checked with the Red Roof Inn and shockingly found no evidence of the boy claiming to be Timothy ever being there, either on their security cameras or records. Moreover, no vehicle matching the description they were given was found on security cameras. Something was very wrong, but it wouldn't be until much later that the truth was revealed. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. Or if this is your first time here, then welcome. Today we are going to be covering the case of Timmothy Pitzen and his mother, Amy Fry Pitzen. I've been waiting to cover this case since I started the channel, as it is one of the most harrowing, and I still hold out hope that one day Timothy will be found. This case has the tendency to stick with people, because it feels impossible that we do not have answers over 10 years later. But alas, here we are. This video was also suggested by my subscribers and a great deal of my patrons over on Patreon, my paid membership site that allows me to produce content full-time. And thanks to my patrons, I was able to handle the medical emergency that occurred last month. I have decided to quit my job to do this full-time, and for that, I want to say thank you. YouTube often demonetizes this content, but either way, I'll always make content regardless of whether or not I'm being paid, so I appreciate the support from those watchers. With all of that said, let us begin. Timothy Pitzen was born October 18, 2004, to his parents, James Pitzen and Amy Fry Pitzen, who viewed him as a miracle. James and Amy had met at a small party thrown by their mutual friends, and at once they fell for each other. Amy had just come out of her 3rd failed marriage and had been going through a long depression, and James had recently survived his fight with cancer. When they met, they felt like they had been placed in the right place at the right time, and their lives were destined to be entwined. Amy had been dealing with mental health issues her entire life, often going from emotional highs where she felt on top of the world and unstoppable, to steep, depressing lows, where she would feel as if her life was no longer worth living, and that the world would be better off without her. In these lows, she would lash out at those around her, leading to moments of intense anger and distancing. In the cases of her previous marriages, she had cited her depression and emotional instability as being what caused their ends. She would lash out or act impulsively in a bid to feel something other than the negativity she was feeling, and it would result in her partners being hurt and leaving her. When the two met, James seemed to believe that he could simply love the depression out of Amy. Amy had previously tried to take her own life, once before she met James, and a second time shortly after they began seeing each other, which James felt he could have prevented. He felt that by being there for her and making her the number one priority in his life, he could make her see how truly wonderful and amazing she was. For For the first year of their relationship, the couple did long distance, only seeing each other when their schedules would allow for it. But James put in the time and effort, always telling Amy just how wonderful she was in his eyes and how much he truly cared for her. Unfortunately, as many of us are likely aware, depression doesn't simply just go away because you are well loved or treated well by the people around you. It has very little to do with who you spend time with and how they treat you, and much more to do with how your brain is wired to work. Though James most assuredly came from a place of love and good intentions, the idea that simply loving Amy would solve her mental health issues was incorrect, and this well-intentioned belief would later lead to a number of fights and misunderstandings. After they had been dating for a significant amount of time, Amy shocked James with the news that she was pregnant. The pair had not been trying for a child, but they also had not been practicing safe sex, or really using any form of birth control. James had been told by his doctors previously that he would be unable to father a child, given his cancer treatment's negative effects on his body, and so the pair felt comfortable not taking any precautions. But despite both being shocked by the discovery, they were ecstatic. Both excitedly told their families and got married, looking forward to the future they would have together. And Amy decided on the name Timothy, with 2 M's, and told her sister that her little boy was going to be special, hence the special spelling. He was going to be amazing, she told her, and everyone would know who he was. And unfortunately, she was right. The moment Timothy was born, Amy was obsessed with him. Her life revolved around him, and she would spend all of her free time with her son, taking photos and videos of everything he did. When she wasn't with him, she was talking about him, telling everyone at work about how amazing he was and how fast he was learning. However, she was still dealing with mental health issues. Her highs mainly focused around her son, and being what she believed was a good mother, but her lows were now larger, with her at times lashing out at her husband and believing that he no longer loved her. The pair began to fight more and more, with Amy lashing out in cruel, vindictive ways, and James meeting her energy and striking her back emotionally. Their marriage was beginning to show signs of stress in 2008, with them fighting frequently, but it was only when James found that Amy had reconnected with her ex-husband via Facebook that things would take a turn for the worse. According to James, he found that Amy had been messaging her ex-husband, a man that he believed mistreated her and therefore was responsible for her depression. Again, though Amy had dealt with depression her entire life, James erroneously believed that it was caused by a broken relationship, and therefore could be fixed with love. The messages started out innocent, but eventually the exes made plans to meet up with each other when James was out of town to have sex. When James found these messages, he was both heartbroken and angry. He spent years with Amy, consistently loving her and combating the damage that her ex had done to her self-esteem, only for her to cheat on him. He felt betrayed, and Amy tried to downplay the interaction and state that James was overreacting. As the fight continued on, James told Amy that she would have to make the choice, either her ex-husband or Timothy and him. James gave his wife an ultimatum, saying if she did not stop contacting her ex, he would file for divorce and full custody of Timothy. He told her that if they were going to get a divorce, he would take their son, and she would never see him again, as a way to hurt her so he could win the fight. At once, Amy broke down, and the pair made up. But afterwards, Amy became even more territorial, as she felt as if she couldn't trust James. The fight occurred in 2008, and it seemed that after that, even in their good times, she still harbored a fair amount of mistrust for her spouse. She opened an email account under her maiden name and used it for purchases and conversations she didn't want her husband to see. She began taking small, unexplained, long day trips to various parts of Wisconsin behind James's back. And as time wore on, she came up with a plan that would forever change the course of the entire family's lives. May 11th, 2011. The day began as any other had before it, with the entire family waking up and getting ready to go off to their respective jobs and school. The day before, Amy had dealt with an extreme case of vertigo and dizziness, so James told her that he would be driving the family to school and to work, just to make sure they would arrive safely. Oddly enough, this assertion seemed to annoy Amy, who asked James if he didn't trust her with their son, to which he told her he did. He just wanted to make sure she was okay after her previous medical issues the day before. Amy appeared annoyed at this, but didn't argue. After that, he dropped his son off at his kindergarten class at Greenman Elementary School, telling him he loved him as he went to class. He had no reason to believe that this would be the last time he would see his son. Instead of going to work, Amy drove to Timothy's school and checked him out of class, telling his teachers that there was a family emergency and he needed to come with her right away. In stark contrast, her demeanor towards Timothy was energetic and fun. Whatever was wrong, she wasn't telling her son, and they set out for what seemed to be a fun-filled day together. She took Timothy out for food and dropped her car off for repairs at a local repair shop. As they waited for the car to be repaired, an employee drove them to the Brookfield Zoo. Timothy was obsessed with animals. He had gone to the zoo many times with his family. He stated that it was one of his favorite places. And from security camera footage, it was clear that Amy was doting on her son, making sure he had everything he wanted. While the pair was at the zoo at 12 p.m. noon, James arrived back at the school to pick Timothy up. When he entered the classroom, the teacher was shocked to see him. She informed him that Timothy had been picked up earlier in the day, shortly after he had been dropped off. James didn't believe her and asked to see who had signed him out, and was annoyed to find that it had been his wife. He felt, originally, she must have done this to get back at him for saying she shouldn't drive Timothy to school, but felt that his son was safe, as long as he was with his mother. Though their marriage was disintegrating, he didn't believe that she would do anything to hurt him or his son, and that, if anything, she would come home in a couple of hours and they could talk. He called Amy's cell phone multiple times and tried to get in contact with her to see what her end goal was, but she refused to answer. Again, this only served to annoy James, but he felt as long as his son was with his mother, they would be fine. He contacted relatives and told them about the situation, and urged them to get into contact with Amy, but she likewise ignored their calls as well. At first, many of the relatives placated James, telling him everything would be fine, and that the situation would right itself when Amy came home. But as the day wore on into night, and still no one had heard from Timothy or Amy, James contacted the police and filed a missing persons report for his wife and son. Unsurprisingly, the police weren't quick to act, given that they felt there was no reason to believe that Timothy was in any real danger. This inaction would have devastating consequences that we still feel today. At the same time that James was finding out his son had been taken out of class and was notifying their family, Amy and Timothy had returned to the car repair shop to pick up her vehicle. But instead of driving home or to a relative's house, Amy drove her son to Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee, Illinois. Key Lime Cove has since been rebranded as Great Wolf Lodge and is an indoor water park. The family had previously visited the resort together, and like the zoo, it was one of Timothy's favorite places. On security footage, the pair was caught having a great time, and once more, it seemed that Amy was giving her son everything he wanted and asked for when they were there. Timothy was obviously excited. He had spent the day doing some of his favorite things with his favorite person. The mother and son duo spent the night at the resort, all the while James and the police set out trying to find them. The next day, Timothy and Amy checked out of the Key Lime Cove Resort and drove to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, which is once again another indoor water park. They spent the day together, ignoring relatives' concerned calls, and seemed to be having a great time. The next day, May 13th, they checked out of the hotel at 10 a.m., as captured on security footage, and Timothy would never be seen again. However, he would be heard. After checking out of the resort between 12 noon and 1:30 p.m., Amy called several different family members, including her brother-in-law and her mother. She told everyone that she talked to that she and Timothy were fine, they were safe, and they were not in trouble. According to her mother, she said, quote, "We're fine, we'll be home in a day or two. I just need some time to figure out and try to think how to approach this," seemingly referring to the disintegration of her marriage with James. According to James's brother, when Amy called him, she said, "Timothy is fine, Timothy belongs to me. Timothy and I will be fine. Timothy is safe." The young boy could be heard in the background of these calls, repeatedly stating that he was hungry, which was something he did often. According to the people she talked to, she seemed fine, if not a bit agitated, and clarified that Timothy was her son and he was safe with her. Everyone who knew Amy knew she wouldn't have hurt Timothy, and simply hearing them both did wonders for their nerves. Even still, they continued to feel as if something were deeply wrong. The calls were traced by the police and found to have come from the northwest area of Sterling, Illinois, near Route 40, and they would indicate the last time Timothy would ever be heard from. 6 hours after those calls were made, Amy would be seen on security cameras once more, this time by herself. Timothy was no longer with her, and she seemed to be at ease and unbothered. She was seen going into a Family Dollar in Winnebago, Illinois, where she bought a pen, notepaper, and envelopes. She was then seen at a grocery store in the same area, and then, 4 hours later, checked in to the Rockford Inn in Rockford, Illinois. According to those who encountered her, she was calm and didn't appear to be in a state of stress. It was there that she killed herself by cutting her wrists and neck while overdosing on antihistamines, but not before writing 3 letters, one to her husband, one to a friend, and another to her mother. Using the pen and paper she had bought earlier in the day, Amy left a note that was found next to her body when she was discovered the following morning. The contents of this note have still not been made public. However, according to every source that has reported on this case thus far, the note went well into detail explaining what she did and why. According to James and the police officers who read the note, she apologized for the mess she had created, and went further to say that Timothy was safe with people who loved him and that would never be found. She said that she would never allow Timothy to be taken away from her, especially by James, and that she had left him in the care of people who would love and care for him. The letter, like the calls she had made the day before, was overtly possessive of their son, aggressively claiming ownership of him and his life. It also implied that James would have hurt Timothy to get back at her, although there was no proof or indication that James had, at any point, abused Timothy. 2 days after the discovery of her body and the note, Amy's mother received the following letter going into further detail about what had happened, and why she felt compelled to kidnap and hide her own son. Parts of the letter were initially read out on Nancy Grace, then again on HLN's Real Life Nightmare, but the contents of the letter in full have not been transcribed or publicized that I was able to find. Mom, I know you were hurt and frustrated, and I wish I had something better to say than I love you, but I don't. I have never felt I belonged here. I have tried very hard to fit in, to be happy, to be good to those around me, but somehow I've always felt apart from everything. Tim helped me with that for a while, and maybe if Jim and I had been better, it would be okay, but everything just fell apart, and this time there are too many pieces to pick up again. I can't take the chance of Jim hurting Tim because of my choices, so I've taken him somewhere safe. He'll be well cared for, and he says that he loves you. Please know that there is nothing that you could have done or said that would have changed my mind. It was just time to say goodbye. I love you, Mom. Amy. After the discovery of Amy's body, the investigation into where Timothy was taken began in earnest. Though he had been reported missing the same day, and Amy had used a number of credit cards, making the pair easily traceable, the police hadn't prioritized the case until Amy's death, and would have to play catch-up. The hotel room where she was found was grisly, and they noted the manner of death didn't necessarily match her circumstances. She had cut her wrists and her neck after purposely overdosing on antihistamines, which felt, to some, like overkill. Professionals who have looked at this case have noted that she had previously attempted suicide twice before, and it appeared that she wanted to be successful in this attempt. While scouring the scene for any evidence pertaining to Timothy's well-being, the police noted that none of the items that Amy had been seen buying for Tim during their 3-day-long vacation were in her possession. She had purchased numerous gifts, toys, and shirts for the boy, but there weren't any in her car, nor were they in the hotel room where she was found. They also noted that Timothy's car seat was missing from the vehicle, leading credence to the idea that he had been given to someone else for safekeeping. It would later be found that the car seat was never in the car in the first place, and it had been left at Timothy's grandparents' home the week prior. Alarmingly, the investigators stumbled across a large amount of blood in the back seat of Amy's car, exactly where Tim always sat. The blood was long since dried, but after running it through DNA analysis, they found it did indeed belong to Timothy. The investigation began to consider that Amy had possibly killed her son. However, James and the rest of the family disputed this assertion. The family would go on to claim that the dried blood was a false lead and was simply the result of a nosebleed from Timothy months before the road trip. They continued to insist that though she had harmed herself, she would never do anything to hurt her child. The police had little to go on in terms of what was left in Amy's possession at the time of her death and what her notes stated, so instead, they turned their investigation to her car and what was left in it. Amy's SUV was visibly dirty and had soil, tall grass, and weeds stuck to the undercarriage when it was located after her death. Forensic testing on the plant and sediment materials on the car indicated it stopped for a time on a gravel area just off an asphalt road that had at one time been treated with glass road-making beads. The vehicle backed into a grassy meadow or field, which contained Queen Anne's lace and black mustard plants, and would have been nearly treeless. Some oak or birch trees were in the general area, but not in the direct place where the car stopped. There was possibly a pond or a small stream close by. There were no indications that the land was cultivated as either lawn or for growing crops. Investigators think the meadow is probably in Lee County, or Whiteside County in northwestern Illinois, but they are also considering Carroll, Ogle, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties. Despite that break, now over 10 years after the fact, we still have no idea where Timothy was left. It wouldn't be until autumn of 2013 that there would be another break in the case. When Amy died, her cell phone was not on her person, and would later be found on the roadside of Route 78, seemingly unharmed and still functional. Investigators went back to the place where it was found and conducted a search, but found nothing else of interest, and nothing of interest in the phone itself. Because of the open-ended nature of this case, there are many theories as to what happened. The first theory is that Amy left Timothy with a still unidentified friend, and he has been raised with them. This theory points to Amy's assertion in her letters and notes that she left Tim with people who would take care of him and raise him as their own, as well as the assertion that she would never hurt her own son. There were no records of her contacting anyone on her phone or her computer, or any money exchanging hands for this to be the case. Given the press coverage of the case, a family randomly gaining a new member whose name just so happens to be Tim would raise suspicion, so this is unlikely, unless he was kept under lock and key. That stated, there is an offshoot of this theory that could explain why he hasn't been seen publicly and how he could have avoided detection for so long, and that's the theory that Amy left Tim in an Amish community. Because the Amish shun modernity and are so accepting of people joining their communities, it's unlikely they would have known the circumstances in which Tim was being given to them, or seen any person's flyers that were around. If Amy came to the community and said she was giving up her son with the hopes they could raise him, it's likely they would have accepted him outright and without question or money exchanging hands. There is an Amish community in the area in which it's theorized she drove, so many believe this is the case. Many private investigators have looked into this theory and do not believe it to be true. Investigators have gone to the communities with flyers and explained what occurred, but according to reports, no young man was ever dropped off and there is no sign of Timothy. The final and one of the most prevalent theories is that Amy killed her son, buried his body in an unknown location, and then killed herself to be with him. In the notes she left, she states that Tim is with people who love him and will take care of him. Many people believe that person is her and cite her possessiveness over him in their final days. Why would the woman who repeated that Timothy was hers and would never be taken from her leave him with another party? She took him on a trip, going to all of his favorite places before she decided to kill him, and did so in order to get revenge on her husband. The theory goes further to state that she lied about what happened to Tim to either give her family false hope that he is still alive or to further hurt them and never provide closure. But as it stands now in the year 2022, we have no idea, and it feels as if we are no closer to knowing what truly happened to the young boy. As stated in the intro, in 2019, a person came forward stating that he was Timothy Pitzen and that he had escaped from his kidnappers, but he was later revealed to be 23-year-old Brian Michael Reaney, a man who had just been released from prison less than a month prior to his claims. This devastated the Pitzen family, who had been led to believe their relative had come back from the abyss. According to Reaney, he had watched a television special about Timothy and pretended to be him because he wanted a second chance at growing up, this time with a family that loved him. He claimed that watching James Pitzen plead for his son's safe return made him want to be Timothy because, quote, if he had gone missing, his dad would have kept drinking. Though this hoax was devastating, it did have the added benefit of putting Timothy's name back in the spotlight and garnering more public attention for the missing child. This is the latest age-progressed photo of Timothy, and it is my hope that one day we see this case solved. If you have made it to this point in the video, thank you for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content. And if there is a case you want to see me cover, leave it in the comments down below. I will see you in the next video, and remember, stay safe.